Yo, how's it going everybody? You got Sketch here and welcome back to the channel. And on today's episode we're taking a look at an obscure vertical shoot 'em up from NMK that, much like Gunnail, is a solid but lesser talked about game series. We're checking out Thunder Dragon, developed by NMK and distributed by Tecmo, releasing to arcades in 1991. You get 8 fairly challenging stages that, once the credits roll, loops again with increased difficulty. This was ported to the Nintendo Switch in 2021 from publisher Hamster, and this is the version that we'll be looking at today. Let's prepare to take flight and see what's good with the story real quick. Story-wise, it's pretty straightforward and doesn't really explain much besides the short synopsis that comes with the arcade cabinet, which goes a bit like this. A group of mad scientists have taken over the SOL satellite among several other weapons of mass destruction, and it's up to you and your combat helicopter to stop them. With your bottomless arsenal and quick wits, you're humanity's last hope in preventing world domination. Developer NMK tends to gloss over narratives with their games and get right to the action, which I can totally respect. Gameplay-wise, you've got a 2D vertical shoot 'em up that, much like titles of the era, is pretty fast and relentless. Enemies really don't waste much time before barreling at you in a flurry of bullets and explosions. This has a similar feel to games from developer Compile, especially with how it handles its upgrade system. Icons labeled 1 through 4 each have different upgradable shots, like an increased spread shot, cannons, multi-directional lasers, and what's essentially an aerial shotgun, and man does it lay the smack down. You've also got crush bombs in the form of orbital laser strikes, which you can carry several of until you get shot down. Controls are pretty tight, and in the absence of speed upgrades, your helicopter is quite nimble. Your hitbox is also relatively small here, so bullets can graze your chopper most times without sending you crashing into the earth, in most instances, allowing you to get pretty spicy with those more aggressive tactics. Though keep in mind it is one hit and you lose your bomb stacks and a life. There's also no checkpoints or respawn delays, so deaths don't really impact play much since you pick up right where you leave off, even with continues. Through 8 stages, you'll fly through each level, downing enemies until you get to the final boss encounter. Leading up to boss fights will have you dealing with waves upon waves of adds and some major characters throughout each location. The enemies start off simple enough, but then quickly start not only throwing a lot of gunfire your way, before literally flinging their crafts at you in hopes of collision. The larger major enemies will often have more complex fire patterns to throw at you, but it never quite hits bullet hell level degrees, though you will see some interesting assortments for sure. Once you clear the final encounter on stage 8, the credit sequence will start, and when it's finished, you can loop through each level again, which eventually throws in a stage randomizer, letting you play through more difficult versions of the past stages until you either walk away from the cabinet or close the game. The ending sequence only plays once after stage 8, so going further only nets a higher score and is more so an endurance test for those that want to go for it. Stages 9 and up do get pretty hectic and will test your trigger fingers and abilities to dodge bullets quickly, since it dials everything up significantly, including the amounts of enemies on screen at a time. These levels are pretty fun and make the first 8 seem much easier by comparison the next time around. The challenge goes from pretty fair to pretty steep here depending on skill level and knowing which weapons work best in which situations, even though you'll probably get toasted numerous times. But it does let you figure out various strategies and weapon combos, and with unlimited continues, it's essentially an endless mode. Graphics wise, this looks pretty sick with a crossover of several visual styles. It looks like the result of smashing the style of Gundam and Potlabor's universe together and added a pinch of aliens for good measure. There's a few sprites in here that look similar to the Marine dropship, which also looks pretty cool. Enemy designs are mainly mechanical Goliaths and other various mobile suit fitted ops. There's a few bosses in the game too that are massive, and you can actually see the final boss several times before the final encounter on stage 8, which is also a nice touch. The visual aesthetic also looks similar to some of the Compile games as far as designs. Mostly Alesta series comes to mind. Environments are all fairly detailed, with some nice static layering in several spots. While the backgrounds don't do much in the way of dynamic scrolling tricks, there's a few areas that have animations like flashing neon signs and such. Stages do have a lot of visual detail, and the cities and space stations do look especially good here. The amount of detail with the explosions and upgraded weapons make the screen a veritable fireworks show that dazzles while not bogging the game down too much. One thing that definitely stands out is its American style design with the Marine motif. The livestock icons are US flags, and the ending cutscene splash image is both decorated uniformed pilots and salute to the flag. There is also an even gnarlier game over screen with 2 flag draped coffins, so it made a point to display both sides of conflict either in victory or defeat. It reminds me a lot of how Data East games depicted Americans in games like Bad Dudes or even Sly Spy at times. Also, I don't know why, but this reminds me of shoot 'em ups you would see on NEC hardware, but in the arcade setting, if that makes any sense. It's not a bad thing either, considering there are some phenomenal shoot 'em ups on those systems, and it's got a very familiar formula of enemies and locales as seen in other games, and it's done pretty well here without being overly flashy. This also, while not a hardware pusher, has got some pretty dang solid graphics to it, which its sequel would elevate a couple years later. Sound-wise, Thunder Dragon is pretty raucous with its banging soundtrack from Hideo Kazunori, who also contributed to the soundtrack from Task Force Harrier, which released the same year. The tunes are hype all the way through and has a similar sound to the music you'll hear in Gunnail. There's a couple repeated tracks as well as the same boss tune being used in all 8 levels, but there are some bonafide jams in here. Sound effects work is also pretty good with some nice crunch to the explosions and weapon fire audio. The sound of the orbital strike is especially beefy with some nice bass as it rains down destruction. There's even a little bit of speech synth in the beginning of each stage as your pilot radios in upon receiving orders, and it's some nice attention attention to detail with its military aesthetic. All in all, the audio is well solid here, and it's a strong aspect of the game most definitely. Overall, Thunder Dragon is a solid shoot 'em up from NMK, and amongst their varied catalog is certainly an outlier in the best way. It's a challenging yet fair game, and has that ring to it, making it something you'll want to come back to even after repeated play. This and its sequel are both awesome shoot 'em ups available on the Switch, and both should get talked about a bit more often than they do. Thunder Dragon gets an 8 out of 10 and comes recommended to shoot 'em up fans and vertical shooter fans looking for an off-kilter title that's solid from front to back and serves up a decent challenge while not being too overwhelming most of the time. Its sequel, Thunder Dragon 2, will switch up the formula a little bit, adding in a few unseen traits, and we'll take a look at that relatively soon. Both of these are amongst favorites in the NMK roster, so these are a great addition to any collection. Don't underestimate the challenge, since it will send some surprises, especially on those loops, but for those familiar with the genre, this is a fun one to learn and optimize strategies. And I thank you again if you made it this far into the video. If you find these videos helpful, that's awesome. I'm glad you can use this as a resource. Check back often, we'll have more reviews and commentaries coming up in the near future. Until then, take it easy and stay safe out there. I'll see you on the next one.